Welcome to True Drew Podcast, your source for all things Nancy Drew. I'm your host, Avery, and on this podcast, we'll discuss everything from the Nancy Drew books, to computer games, to movie adaptations, and TV shows. Nothing is off the table. So if you're a True Drew, you'll definitely want to tune in for this podcast. Hello guys, and welcome to another episode of True Drew Podcast. And today we're going to be talking about the mystery of the glowing eye. I keep wanting to flip around the words and say the glowing eye mystery. I mean, either way, people are going to know which mystery you're talking about because this is one of the weirdest books, and the cover itself is super creepy. So this is book number 51 in the original mystery stories, and it first came out in 1974. And I'm not gonna lie, this book cover genuinely terrified me as a kid. Like, if I was reading this book late at night, I would actually flip it over so the cover was face down because I don't know, the big glowing red eye on the front, it was really scary. I actually talked about this on Instagram with some of you all, and you were like, yep, this was one of the scarier book covers to me too. This one, and then Clue of the Tapping Heels, I think I remember telling you guys, I don't know what it was about that cat's face and its big yellow eyes, but it just, creepy. So I've actually picked out 3 separate covers for the mystery of the glowing eye to talk about today, and if you ever want to see these, I post them on my Instagram, True Drew Podcast, on Wednesdays. But the first 2 covers are very similar. I believe the second one is actually a UK edition, but on the first cover we have Nancy on this red background, and there's this huge glowing eye, and then there's some text around that eye that says, "Warning, Cyclops." And then Nancy herself is wearing this almost like purple, I think it has like little flowers on it, flowered looking shirt. And she's got the strawberry blonde hair, the side bangs, and the flipped out hair. And she looks genuinely terrified. Now, in the UK version, it's not that different. They left the eye pretty much the same. The text at the top is very like pink and stylized looking. It looks very 70s. But Nancy herself, like her hair and her face look a little different. She doesn't look scared enough on this cover. Like the first one, she looks absolutely terrified. The second one, she just looks like she could be looking over her shoulder at a restaurant and being like, "I'll have a water too." Like, girl, there's a giant glowing eye behind you. I need to see some terror, some fear for your life. But I will say she has very white teeth on this second cover. Like, the artist was really like, let's give Nancy some pearly whites. Now, the third edition of this cover, it is pretty interesting. It's a pink book cover, and it's saying that this is the 39th mystery, which I'm like, oh, okay. But Nancy, Bess, and George, I'm assuming that's who's on the cover with Nancy here, they look very 80s. And the eye in this, like, you can see the veins in it, and it's got like light coming out of it. It's giving me Illuminati vibes a little bit. It's kind of creepy. But Nancy, Bess, and George have the 80s hair, and I don't know what Bess is wearing. It looks like some kind of a scarf or a shawl she's like draped over her shoulders, and it almost looks like it has sea creatures on it or something. I don't know. It's kind of cool. And then I want George's top. Like, it is like brown and dark brown and light brown, and it's like a tank top over another blouse. Like, it's pretty cool, actually. Like, I would wear that. So I love coming up with funny cover spoofs for these books, and the cover spoof that I came up with for this book is "I retina, we're gonna read another mystery." Who doesn't love a good eye pun? I'd have more puns, but I risk them being too corny. Okay, I'll stop for now. But the other funny cover spoof that I came up with is just Nancy and the huge ugly eye, because I mean, it does sum up what this cover looks like. It's horrifying, it's scary, and when we get into the plot of this book, it's pretty scary too. So as far as giving this book cover a rating, I gave it 4 magnifying glasses because it's a scary one. It's memorable. Like, I think if you were to poll most people in the Nancy Drew book fan community, they would be like, yep, that one's very memorable, and then this other one, but like, it makes an impression. Now on to some of the characters that we see in the glowing eye mystery. So of course, Nancy, Bess, and George make regular appearances in this book. There's also Marty King, who is a woman working in Carson's office, and we'll get to that. There's a lot of tea there. There is someone named Miss Wilkin, who is the museum curator, Zap Crossan, who is a pilot / guy in Ned's class, Glenn Munson, another pilot, Professor Titus, and Henry Schneider, who is the president of this museum where this glowing eye keeps showing up. So really quickly, I'll read a synopsis for this mystery. Nancy is talking to Bess and George about how she doesn't like Marty King, a new woman working in her dad's office, when an unpiloted helicopter lands in the front yard with a note from Ned saying to beware the cyclops. Ned has been kidnapped. Coincidentally, Carson is also trying to solve a case involving a glowing eye. Nancy and the gang follow clues and start closing in on Zap Crossan. There are robot helicopters, paralyzing flashlight beams, magnetic fields, and more. Nancy is able to catch Crossan and save Ned. So the newspaper headline synopsis that I came up with is Mystery is in the Eye of the Beholder. Nancy Drew solves museum mystery and rescues kidnapped Emerson student. So I think this is the second or third time that Ned has been kidnapped in the series, but this is the longest amount of time that he's been kidnapped. He's kidnapped for pretty much the majority of the book. And I guess, I don't know, like I wish I could have been a fly on the wall during those meetings with the people writing the books. I guess they were just like, oh, Ned went missing, this other time and people loved it. So maybe we should just make him be gone for the entire book this time. They really delivered with this plot, you guys. And also it was pretty cool seeing Nancy solve this. I mean, her having to find Ned herself, and then she gets really torn up about it. Like, she's worried about him. This may be the most emotion and devotion that we've seen her show Ned Nickerson in the entire series. Who knew that it would only come after he's disappeared for more than 24 hours. Okay, so now we're going to jump into some of the direct quotes and notes I took down for this book. I love doing these because there's so many weird things that stick out to me when reading, and it's fun to just write down and discuss with you guys. So the first note that I have down is Nancy is jealous of Marty King, a 24-year-old platinum blonde who is working in Carson's office. And she wants to be a lawyer, but she keeps trying to take over Nancy's cases. So remember how I said there was some tea in this book? There is some tea. There is some drama with this woman working in Carson's office, and it gets pretty intense. Like, I think that Nancy is pretty much a girl's girl. I feel like she has a lot of friends that are girls, and she's very, you do you can succeed at whatever you want to do as a woman. But when it comes to somebody else trying to take her mysteries from her, all bets are off. So Nancy is talking to Bess and George, and she's saying she really doesn't like this woman, Marty King, and Bess asks if there's a romance between Marty and Carson. And I was like, excuse me, she's 24. And I said, I like Mr. Drew, but he has to be in his late 40s. And Nancy is jealous that she might replace her in solving mysteries, but then Bess's comment gets her thinking, and later on in the book, she starts asking more questions like, is my dad interested in Marty? But before we really have time to think about that, something happens. So an unmanned helicopter lands in the Drews' front yard, and Nancy finds an envelope with her name on it in the helicopter. So she opens it, and it says, beware the cyclops, Ned. And there's a media circus on the lawn, because of course it's not every day in River Heights or pretty much anywhere that a helicopter with no pilot in it lands in, a civilian's front yard. So Hannah shows up in a taxi, and she's just like looking at all these reporters on the lawn and Nancy holding this envelope, and it's just like, that has got to be so bizarre. Like, I know that Hannah Gruen loves the Drews, but there's got to be some point where she's just like, oh my gosh, what's happening now? Like, can I not just bake bread in peace? Like, All I wanted to do was clean these pillow shams today, and I don't want to deal with this. So Nancy starts to wonder if the helicopter is remote controlled. I mean, there's really no other explanation because there's no pilot in there unless they parachuted out of it, but it landed without crashing, so I don't know. And it's about that time that the helicopter tries to lift off again, and so everybody starts piling things in it, heavy things, because they think it has a weight sensor in it. So they're putting everything in it, like bricks and just anything they can grab. And Nancy also finds mud in the helicopter with wood flecks in it. So she starts to think, okay, somebody was in this helicopter. They had mud on their shoes. Maybe they, were in a swamp or something. So she files that information away for later. So the next note that I took down is Ned's been kidnapped and Nancy is incredibly worried for him. She barely eats, according to the book, when Hannah makes dinner. And this was so sad. Like Nancy you can tell in some of the writing throughout this book, she's really worried about Ned. She really cares about him. It was about this time, though, that I started wondering, like, what would somebody want with a star football player for the Emerson College football team who sells insurance on the side? Like, I don't know, but it turns out Ned has more up his sleeve, and they're not just kidnapping him to get at Nancy, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So the next note that I have down is the helicopter takes off in the middle of the night, and the police guard, who they had hired to watch the property and the helicopter, gets knocked out so hard the doctor who comes says he'll need surgery, which that's pretty intense. Like, Nancy's been hit over the head sometimes, but to require surgery, that's bad. So Hannah, of course, sweet dear Hannah Gruen, says that's dreadful. And then some man named Ehrman, who just is there investigating, says, indeed it is, ma'am, and so is all crime. Like, okay, sir, thank you for stating the obvious. So Nancy, Bess, and George are talking about this cyclops that's referred to in the note that Nancy found, and George says a cyclops's main diet is plump young ladies who like to eat sweets. First of all, gross, cannibalism. Let's not even go there. Second, really, George? Like, she's trying to scare Bess and freak her out about this. But I'm like, you're making light of something. Like, your friend's boyfriend has been kidnapped. Probably not the time to be making jokes. So it's after this that Nancy, Bess, and George stop somewhere to eat and see Marty King and her dad. And Marty says hi to Nancy and seems polite, and Nancy catches her dad alone and he tells her to investigate Anderson Museum, and Nancy is happy. She knows, like, her dad isn't replacing her with Marty. She's got this irrational jealousy, and it's mostly because Marty keeps trying to steal her mysteries. But I'm not gonna lie, my eyebrows raised like up to my hairline when I saw that Marty King was out on a lunch date with Carson. I mean, it could have been strictly business because she does work in his office, but I was like, I don't know, it's a little bit suspicious. So after they've eaten, Nancy, Bess, and George go to the office, and an unfriendly lady, Miss Wilkin, at the Anderson Museum takes them around. And it's while they're there that the lights go out and a glowing eye appears on the wall. And when the lights come back on, Miss Wilkins is gone. She's just disappeared. And they find her at her desk, and she said she went to see why the lights went out. And she says engineering students at Emerson have been challenged to figure out how this eye glows. So there's our connection. Ned said to beware the cyclops in that note that Nancy found in the helicopter, and then this Miss Wilkins lady is telling us, oh, well, all these Emerson students were trying to figure out how this eye glows. And I'm like, is this an extra credit project? Like, that part's never really explained. So the girls next talk to Bert and Dave, and they say Zap Crossan, a red-headed guy in Ned's class, is also missing. Okay. And he's a pilot. So there's a helicopter that showed up with a note from Ned, and this other guy in Ned's class is missing, and he also happens to be a pilot. The lines are just lining right up. I'm just going to tell you right now, there's not very much mystery in this mystery. It's pretty much from this point on, we're just like, this guy did it. And it doesn't get any more mysterious than that. So if you're not a fan of those kind of mysteries, if you can even call them a mystery, yeah, You'd probably be disappointed with the plot of this one. So anyways, everybody goes to the airfield, and there's a pilot named Glenn Munson who takes them to Jerry Faber, this other guy, who apparently has a robocopter. Like, that's a super common thing. I don't know. They're just like, oh yeah, that guy Jerry, he has one. But Jerry also says he took some redhead named Crossy over River Heights, and he was looking at houses with binoculars. Like, does anybody think that's creepy? Like, who agrees to take somebody up in a helicopter and just like, they're just scoping out houses? I think I'd have to like be like, we're gonna end this session a little bit early and land because you seem a bit like a stalker. Also, the nickname Crossy, Crossin', it's, it gives itself away, and it has to be Zap Crossin'. But Nancy finds a rare penny in a helicopter, and she thinks it's a significant clue. And I'm just like, okay, so Nancy apparently knows what currency is rare and what's not. I don't know. She's good with money. I will say that. She knows how to spot counterfeit money from a mile away too, but I don't know. This clue, quote unquote, seemed a lot like that clue in the Crooked Banister when it was like, this match must match this other match at the scene of the fire. I don't know. It was like, okay. I'll just let you have that one, Nancy. So meanwhile, Bess and Dave find an abandoned farmhouse, and they think Crossan has been using it. So they go in to investigate, and they fall in a clothes chute and get out. But they find a 1923 S penny in a shirt like the one Nancy found. And I was just like, still, this is just such a random clue. Like, this has a quarter and this has a quarter. Like, it's all connected. It's looking a bit like that guy in that meme who's just like, there's aliens, like conspiracies. I don't think it's a good clue. So after this, Bert and Dave stake out the farmhouse, and then Nancy gets a call asking where Bert and Dave are, but the person won't say who they are and hangs up, so that's pretty mysterious. But the next day, the girls go to the farmhouse, and they can't find Bert and Dave, so they panic, and there's a cop named Anthony Russo who just shows up, and he says he took the guys to a diner in town, because even sleuths have to eat sometimes, and so the girls go and pick them up, and they say they didn't see Crossan', so their stakeout was not successful. So the next note that I have down is Nancy finds out a lab at Emerson was robbed, and so she goes to check it out, but there's an explosion, and she finds a box with a glass eye in it, and when she opens it, it says, "Don't touch me, I am the deadly cyclops." I'm not gonna lie, if I picked something up like that and it started talking to me, I'd probably throw it down and get scared for a second before I realized, like, this is probably a recording. But they don't really explain that. They just drop it. So after this, Nancy and the girls meet some FBI agents at Emerson, and they search Ned's room, which I thought this was a great idea. It's the last place he was probably seen or where he spent a lot of time. It makes sense to search his room. So they find a note that says Cyclops in Greek, and right after that, Miss Nickerson says she received a box sent from Ned full of papers and scientific drawings. So Ned took the time to mail these things to his parents' house, like essentially to himself, because they must have been pretty important. So the girls decide to go check this out because this is the best lead that they've gotten so far, and Nancy says she's going to call Hannah first, but when she does, Marty King answers at their house. When this happened, I gasped out loud because I was like, what is that woman doing at the Drews' house? But Marty says, I guess you're surprised to find me at your house, and giggles. And Nancy asks if she's helping her dad with work, and she says, work, yes, but not legal work. So if I was Nancy, I would be seeing red about now. Like, what is this woman doing at my house with my dad? But apparently Hannah had to go see a sick relative, so she's out of town. And so Marty has just taken it upon herself to cook Mr. Drew dinner. I was like, she is seriously overstepping. Like, what in the world? In what world would that be okay? It's not. Marty King is putting the moves on Mr. Drew, and this made me like livid. Like, and I bet Nancy was mad, but I would just be like, oh, that's just not okay. That's not a work relationship. Like, she's totally flirting with Mr. Drew. But then Nancy puts her on the spot and she asks, solve the glowing eye case yet? And Marty just stammers, no. Checkmate. So while Nancy's got Marty kind of flustered, she says, well, who's your contact? Because she keeps having all this information that she's getting, and Nancy knows she's got a contact somewhere that's giving her this information. Nancy thinks it's Crossan. So Nancy asks, is Crossan her special friend? And Marty says, he'd like to be my special friend, but there's someone I like better. And Nancy immediately worries that it's her father. Ooh, okay, this scene, I was just like, ooh, if I was Nancy, I'd come through the phone. Like, to use the classic 90s Christmas movie Jingle All the Way as an example, it's like that scene when Ted, the annoying neighbor, is like, these cookies. And then Arnold Schwarzenegger is like, put that cookie down. Like, if I was Nancy Drew, I'd be like, Marty King, you get out of my house right now. Whew. So we table that drama for just a second, and Nancy goes to the Nickersons' house to look through Ned's papers, and she finds a code that looks like an outline of an eye. And the Nickersons and Bess and George go to dinner, and Nancy says, I'll meet you in a second. So she starts sketching this code on this blackboard, and then she notices a red-haired man on a ladder copying the numbers down, like spying through the window at her and copying these words down in these codes. And so it's Crossan. So she chases him, but he gets away. But Nancy does find a notebook that he dropped. And so she erases the code and changes it around just enough so it's different from what she wrote down. I liked this. It was very clever. It was very bait and switch. So she leaves the notebook there, thinking he's going to come back for it. But she finds mud on the ladder rungs from Crossan's shoes, and it matches the mud that she found in the helicopter earlier in the book that had like flecks of grass and different stuff in it. So Nancy, Bess, and George return to Emerson at this point, and Bert gets a letter from Ned, and it says on the envelope it was found near the town of Arbutus, and so whoever found it just stuck it in the mail to send it off to who it belonged to. And apparently this town is near a swamp that has similar mud to the stuff Nancy has been finding in the helicopter and on Crossan's shoes, and after doing research at Emerson's library. So Ned's note says, don't know where I am, prisoner of red-haired nut. So you see what I mean? We know it's Crossan. Like, we've known it's Crossan since like page 20 or page 30 or something. Like, it's very obvious. So everyone goes to check out the dangerous swamp where this mud sample came from, and they see a helicopter leaving. So if that wasn't a clue, I mean, like, that's the biggest clue we've seen yet. But Bess also steps in a deep hole and she gets soaked, because this is a very swampy area they're in. But they do find a cabin with a full-blown laboratory in it, and they find Ned's initials carved on the wall near a cot. So Ned was held here for a brief time, and he was probably in that helicopter that just took off. And in reading this part of the book, you can really sense Nancy's disappointment that they just missed him. It's like, we almost had Ned back with us, we almost saved him, and we missed him again. So next, we learn that George's dad is an electronic engineer. This was kind of just a fun fact, but she helps them use a ham radio to contact the police. So apparently, like, George has picked up some of these skills that her dad has taught her. But Nancy also looks at the cot, and she finds notes from Ned hidden inside the mattress and in the box springs. So one says the madman holds him at gunpoint, and another talks about the copter being sent to Nancy's house. I can almost picture Ned just whenever Crossan isn't paying attention, scrawling these notes down and hiding them in hopes that someone will find them later, but it's pretty creepy. Like, this guy's holding him at gunpoint. That's super scary. So when they get back to Emerson, Nancy discovers an eye that glows in the dark on one of the notes when she turns the lights off. So she's laying out Ned's papers and looking at the notes, and that happens. And they all go back to the first cabin on a hunch and encounter signs that say danger, explosives. So they continue on foot, and again, they see a helicopter taking off. So apparently Crossan is just moving Ned to these different locations and hiding him over and over again, and they just keep barely missing him. Now, the next note that I have down is Nancy takes a helicopter back to River Heights, and Marty and her dad have gone to lunch. Ugh. So she then calls George's dad, who says he went to the Anderson Museum where the glowing eye has been spotted, and Miss Wilkins told him it's gone. For some reason, I think she's lying. flying. So next I have down that Nancy interrogates Marty and asks her about Crossan, and she says he sends her letters, which she ignores. And it doesn't say what's in those letters. I'm guessing it's kind of like professing his love for her, and she doesn't obviously return his feelings, but it's never really said what's in those letters, just that she ignores them. This guy is creepy. Not only is he just has stalker tendencies. He's sending Marty letters. He's spying through windows at people. He's obviously kidnapped somebody, and he was, surveilling River Heights with binoculars from a helicopter. He's super weird. So after this, Glenn Munson, the other pilot, flies Nancy to the museum to meet and talk to Professor Titus. And it's when they're there at the museum that Nancy's hand gets stuck to a magnetic wall. Okay, so this was so wild to me. Like, they had to go turn some stuff off, and Nancy could then pull her hand off. It was so funny to me. This is physically impossible unless Nancy Drew is the bionic woman and we had no idea. So at this point in the mystery, Miss Wilkins has resigned from Anderson Museum, so Nancy volunteers herself and Bess and George to help out. And this kind of reminded me of playing Secret of the Scarlet Hand, because you're kind of basically helping all these curators at the museum, and then you pretty much run the museum by yourself as an 18-year-old. But it made me think of that game so much. Okay, so this next note, it's never a Nancy Drew book without some other random man expressing that he has feelings for Nancy or thinks she's attractive. So Glenn, the pilot, holds Nancy's hand and says, "Anytime you need me, let me know and I'll come flying in." I'm probably reading too much into this. He's obviously he wants to help Nancy find Ned. He knows she's really upset about Ned, but it's just the way that they write some of these scenes or these sentences. It's how can I not hear that? How can I not read into it? Because everyone's always Nancy's so attractive, and all these men are throwing themselves at her. So I thought it was funny. In another life, Nancy could be with a pilot. So Nancy, Bess, George, and Professor Titus go to the museum, and while Nancy and George are exploring the second floor, they hear a thump on the third floor, and Bess also finds a weird journal that says, "To my lovely and understanding aunt, Beatrice Wilkin, signed the Cyclops." Wait a minute, is Crossan the Cyclops? And Beatrice Wilkin is his aunt? Dun dun dun. So everyone settles in to stay the night at the museum. And a man comes by from the phone company saying people have been calling and can't get through, and it turns out the wire was cut. So he fixes it and leaves, and then everyone is resting, and when they wake up, there's a glowing eye again, and someone tells them not to follow them. This was so weird. So Nancy tries to move, but it's like she's been paralyzed and nobody can move. It's super weird. And then Professor Titus thinks they were hypnotized. So Nancy calls the police once she can move again, and they come, and they're able to unlock the third floor, and there's a whole nother lab up there and a bunch of pictures of animals and people getting one eye gouged out. It's really creepy. And this part broke my heart, but Nancy cries because she's scared that Crossan will maim Ned and take one of his eyes out. It's just I don't know what it would be like to have that realization. He is with a crazy person, and he could do so many bad things to him. He's held him at gunpoint. That's gotta be horrible. So when Nancy goes outside, she finds footprints, and one of the treads has an actual Cyclops eye design. Okay, Nike didn't make these, but this guy is obsessed with eyes. It's weird. So the cops investigate, and they say that once upon a time there were some men in Europe who pretended to be magicians but were thieves. And I was like, this sounds a little bit like the Illuminati or the Masons. I don't know. I could almost hear the DVD menu for National Treasure in my head. A treasure beyond all imagining. Because I was obsessed with that movie, and I would often fall asleep and it would turn back on to the menu. Random facts about me. That was my movie in 2004, okay? So the next note that I have down is Tim Rooney, the locksmith, shows up again and scares them and says, "It's just me, old Tim Rooney." I love people that just speak in third person. It's just well, okay, you're strange. So Carson shows up again and he freezes people with his paralyzing beam. He's got like some kind of flashlight that he can just turn on people when they freeze. It's like, this seems like a fun game of freeze tag, but like if you were to actually be paralyzed by something like this, it'd be kind of scary. But Nancy and Bert tackle him and call the police and they take him to jail. But he won't reveal where Ned is, so Nancy can't sleep when they get back to Emerson and she's really worried about Ned, so she decides to go walk around campus to clear her head and she sees a helicopter land. And it's Ned. So instead of one of those epic, like, early 2000s movies where the people are rushing through the airport to find each other, like, Nancy Drew can never be normal. So she's just walking around campus, and then this helicopter lands, and it's her boyfriend, who is a football player and sells insurance on the side, and she's just like, Ned! And so they run to each other, and he tells Nancy that Carson wanted his invention, which had something to do with lasers. That's why he kidnapped him? It's so bizarre. So after this sweet reunion and finding Ned finally, Nancy talks to her dad and he says he fired Marty King because she was jealous of Nancy and she asked Carson to marry her. So sometimes I wish that we could see what Carson's thinking. Like, we always see what Nancy's thinking, but I'm like, when did this happen? Did this go down over the steak and potatoes that Marty made for him? Like, oh, here you go, Mr. Drew, and by the way, can you marry me? Like, ugh, like, thank goodness Carson has some sense and was like, no, and you're fired. So Nancy's response to this is, Dad, if you ever want to find me a new mother, please promise me she won't be someone who tries to solve my mysteries. And I was just like, Nancy, I would add to that, or is 6 years older than me, like, hello. So that is the end of my notes for this book, and for the What's Cooking section, we got quite a few mentionings of Hannah Gruen's cooking. She made hot chocolate and cookies, lemon meringue pie, hamburgers, and fruit and ice cream parfaits. And for the things that I said that Nancy could add to her resume, I said she was a soil expert. Like, she was analyzing that mud and grass for I don't know how long and was just like, oh, this came from a swamp. And like me, maybe it's just because I have no green thumb whatsoever, but I'd just be like, this looks like dirt to me. I don't know what it is. So now let's discuss the things I liked and the things I didn't like about the mystery of the glowing eye. Or the glowing eye mystery, I always want to mix this one up. So the things I liked, Ned being kidnapped, not because he got kidnapped necessarily, like because I don't like him, but because Nancy had to save him. That made this mystery kind of cool and kind of different. And I was here for the Nancy / Marty / Carson drama. Like, that was like, whew, I was mad for Nancy. I was like, this woman better get out of your house and stop working for your dad. Like working for your dad. Like, that, it was funny to read, but it made me mad for Nancy. Now, the things I didn't like about this mystery, I was like, robot helicopters, paralyzing flashlight beams, really? Like, it was a bit unbelievable, which, you know, these mysteries aren't necessarily marketed on being believable, but still. And the other thing I didn't like, Marty was 24. 24! Like, when are these books gonna have, like, an age-appropriate relationship or, like, semi-relationship? Like, she wasn't with Mr. Drew, but, like, you know, like, where did all the middle-aged women go? I mean, we've got Hannah, but it's like, no other middle-aged women in a romantic relationship exist in these books. It's weird to me. So as far as my book rating goes for this mystery, I gave it 3 magnifying glasses. It would have been a little bit better if some of the technology could have been more believable, but I did like it. It was an entertaining read. I'll give it that, but I still gave it a 3 because it wasn't like the best. So that concludes today's episode for the glowing eye mystery, or the mystery of the glowing eye, whichever one you want to call it. And for next week's episode, we're going to be talking about the secret of the forgotten city. So if you like petroglyphs and the Southwest, you're going to really like this book. Until next time, thank you for listening to this episode of True Drew Podcast. Can't get enough of the podcast? Then check out my subscription series, True Drew Files, available on Apple and Spotify. For Nancy Drew books and merchandise, you can check out my website, www.truedrewpodcast.com. For business inquiries, you can contact me at truedrewpodcast@gmail.com, or you can connect with me on Instagram at truedrewpodcast.